Lena Kowalski didn't call the police. She didn't turn off the shop light. She just stood in the open bay door of Kowalski and Sons Automotive, a name that hadn't made sense for 3 years, not since her father's stroke, and looked at the rain coming down on the two-lane highway outside Merritt, British Columbia. It was the kind of rain that didn't care about anything, the kind that finds every gap in a roof, every crack in a seal, every weakness in a wall, the kind that had been leaking through the northeast corner of the shop since April, and that she still hadn't fixed, because fixing it cost money and money was the one thing she didn't have. The eviction notice from the landlord was on the workbench behind her. She hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't looked at it again either. It sat there under a crescent wrench like it was just another piece of paper, like it wasn't the thing she'd been lying awake about for 6 nights straight. She was 26 years old. She had engine grease under her fingernails that never fully came out. She had her father's tools and her father's shop and her father's name on the sign, and in 43 days she was going to lose all 3 of them. That was when she heard the bikes. She heard them before she saw them. A low, wet rumble coming down Highway 97 that didn't slow when it should have, then slowed all at once like something was wrong. Lena stepped further into the bay and looked out through the rain. 3 headlights, then 4, then a 5th one pulling off the road at a bad angle. The kind of angle that meant the rider wasn't choosing to stop so much as stopping because they had no choice. The bikes pulled into the gravel lot, 5 of them. The riders wore cuts, leather vests with a patch she didn't recognize at first, a skull over mountain peaks, the words Iron Meridian MC and a half arc below it. They were soaked through, every one of them. The one on the outside bike, a tall man with a graying beard and a road name stitched onto his cut, Hatchet, was off his bike before it stopped rocking. He was moving toward the 5th bike, the one that had pulled in at the wrong angle. The rider on that one was still seated but not sitting right, leaning, head down. Lena was already moving. She crossed the lot in the rain without thinking about it, without deciding to, the way you cross a road when you see something fall. The gravel was slick and her work boots had no grip left in them, and she slid the last 2 steps and caught herself on Hatchet's arm. "What happened?" she said. Not a question, an assessment. Hatchet looked at her. He was the kind of man who had a face that had learned not to show much, but right now it was showing something. "Garrett," he said, and he said the name like it cost him. "He's been off since Kamloops, wouldn't stop, said he was fine." His jaw tightened. He wasn't fine. The man on the 5th bike, Garrett, she understood now, was conscious but barely. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, and when Lena put a hand on his jaw and turned his face toward the shop light, she could see the gray undertone in his skin that wasn't from the cold. His eyes found hers, but they were working to do it. "How long?" she said. 4 hours, said a woman's voice behind her. Lena turned. A small, sharp-faced woman with close-cropped hair and a cut that read Viper had stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. He started slurring around Chase. "We thought it was the cold. It's not the cold." Lena had seen this before. Her father, the night of his stroke, had worn that same gray, had said he was fine, had not been fine. "We need to get him inside now." Hatchet said, "We don't want to." "I know you don't," Lena said. "Bring him inside anyway." She didn't have a hospital. She had a shop phone, a first aid kit, and a father who had taught her more about the human body than she'd ever wanted to know, because he'd believed, with quiet stubbornness, that knowing how things worked was never a waste. She knew the signs. She knew what to watch for. She got Garrett onto the old couch her father had kept in the back office. Every good shop needs a place to think, he'd said, which had meant a place to sleep between jobs. And she covered him with the blanket. She kept in her truck and she called 911 and gave the address clearly, and then she did what she could until the ambulance got there. Hatchet stood in the doorway of the office the whole time. The others stayed in the bay. They didn't touch anything. They didn't ask for anything. The one called Viper made coffee on the little machine by the sink because she'd asked if it was okay and Lena had said yes, and she'd made a full pot without being asked twice. The ambulance took 40 minutes in that rain. During those 40 minutes, Lena talked to Garrett, not about anything important. Just talk, just to keep him present. And she monitored his breathing and his color, and she thought about her father, lying on the kitchen floor of their house 3 years ago while she'd done the same thing, talked to him and watched his color, and she thought, you just keep going. What else do you do? When the paramedics came in, one of them looked at Garrett and then looked at Lena and said, "You have medical training?" "No," she said. "I fix cars." The paramedic looked at Garrett again, at the way he was positioned, the way his airway was clear, the way the blanket was arranged. He nodded once, slowly, like he was recalibrating something. "You did good," he said. The ambulance left. The rain stayed. Hatchet stood in the bay and looked at the floor and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "That was my brother." Lena said, "I know." Not that she'd known, but she'd seen the way he'd stood in that doorway. "He's going to be okay?" Hatchet's voice was careful in the way that voices get when the person speaking them is keeping something caged. "I think so," Lena said. "If they got him when they did." She looked at him. Another hour in that rain and maybe not. Hatchet nodded. He looked around the shop. At the tools hung in order on the pegboard, at the ancient diagnostic machine her father had kept running, with 3 different workarounds, at the sign above the bay door that said Kowalski and Sons in paint that was starting to peel at the corners. His eyes stopped on the eviction notice under the crescent wrench. He didn't say anything about it, but he'd seen it. They stayed until the rain broke, which wasn't until almost 3 in the morning. Viper helped Lena clean up the office. A heavy-set man with a sun-damaged neck and a cut that read cobbler found a slow leak in the bay roof, and climbed up on a step stool without asking, and pressed a rag into it and held it there for 20 minutes until Lena found the sealant tape. The youngest one, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, his cut reading prospect, which meant he hadn't earned his full patch yet, swept the floor of the bay so carefully and so quietly that Lena didn't notice until it was done. Nobody talked much. They just moved around each other in the shop like they'd been there before, like they knew how to exist in a space without taking up more of it than they needed. Before they left, Hatchet came back to the bay door and stood with his helmet under his arm. The rain had pulled back to a drizzle. The highway was dark and the gravel lot was dark, and there was one street lamp at the far end that made everything look like an old photograph. "We'll come back," he said. "Check in when Garrett's." He stopped, started again, "When we know." "You don't have to," Lena said. Hatchet looked at her the way her father used to look at her when she said something he disagreed with but was too tired to argue. "We know we don't have to," he said. "That's not the point." He put his helmet on. He rode out into the drizzle. The others followed. The lot was empty. The shop was quiet. Lena stood in the bay door for a while after they left. Then she picked up the eviction notice and read it again, all the way through for the first time. 43 days. The landlord's name and signature at the bottom, the amount she was behind, the amount she would need to stay. She put it back under the wrench. She turned off the shop light. She went home. 2 days later, Hatchet called the shop number. Garrett had had a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke, the doctors said. They'd caught it early enough. He was going to need monitoring, medications, some time off the road, but he was going to be fine. He was already arguing with the nurses about when he could leave. "That sounds like him," Viper said in the background, and Lena could hear the relief in her voice from across the phone. Hatchet said, "We told the chapter." Lena wasn't sure what that meant. She said, "Okay, all of them," Hatchet said. "Iron Meridian's got 38 riders in BC. We told them what you did. We told them about your shop." A pause. "We told them about the letter on the workbench." Lena was quiet. "You should know," Hatchet said, "that we're not the kind of people who owe debts and don't pay them." "You don't owe me anything," Lena said. "We know," said Hatchet. "That's not the point." She recognized the words. She'd heard them in the bay door 3 nights ago from the same man in the drizzle. She understood now that they weren't just something he said. They were something he meant. She opened the shop at 7 the next Saturday morning. Because she always opened at 7 on Saturdays, she made coffee. She pulled the eviction notice out from under the wrench and put it in her jacket pocket because she would decided she was going to drive it to the landlord's office that morning and ask him, face to face, for an extension. She wasn't sure it would work. She was going to try anyway, because that was the only thing she knew how to do. She was on her second cup of coffee when she heard the first bike. She thought it was a customer. She went to the bay door. It was not one customer, she counted. She stopped counting at 30 because more were still coming. They were coming down Highway 97 from both directions. The ones from the north slowing and pulling in, the ones from the south doing the same, until the gravel lot was full, and then the verge was full. And then the shoulder of the highway had bikes parked on it in both directions for as far as she could see. Hatchet pulled in last. He parked his bike in front of the bay door and took off his helmet and looked at her. "We called some friends from other chapters," he said. Lena looked out at the lot. There were riders she didn't recognize, club patches she'd never seen. Some people who didn't have cuts at all, just regular riders, people in jeans and helmets and highway gear. There was a woman her grandmother's age on a red touring bike with a Canadian flag on the saddlebag. There was a man in a plaid shirt who was clearly not a biker at all, who had clearly just heard something and shown up. "How many?" Lena said. 312, Hatchet said, "give or take." Lena looked at him, at all of them. Viper appeared at Hatchet's shoulder. She was holding something, a canvas envelope, the kind used for bank deposits. She held it out to Lena. "We had a collection," Viper said, "at the chapter meeting Thursday night. And then some people heard about it and sent things through e-transfer. And then some of those people told other people." She shrugged, "a small controlled thing. It's enough to cover what you owe, and the roof repairs. And a few months of operating costs to give you some time." Lena did not take the envelope right away. She stood in the bay door and looked at 312 people in her gravel lot in the morning sun on a Saturday in Merritt, British Columbia, and she thought about 43 days and the letter in her jacket pocket and her father's name on the peeling sign. "I can't just take this," she said. "You're not taking it," Hatchet said. "We're giving it. There's a difference." His voice was patient, the way her father's had been patient when she was learning something and resisting it. She took the envelope. The riders stayed most of the morning. Some of them brought food. Someone had stopped at the Tim Hortons in Merritt, and come back with 3 dozen Timbits and 4 boxes of coffee, and an apologetic shrug about the line. Cobbler found the leak in the bay roof again, and this time fixed it properly, with materials he'd brought in a bag on his bike, which made Lena think that Hatchet had told people what to bring. The prospect, she learned his name was Finn, 21 years old, from Williams Lake, been riding since he was 16. Spent 2 hours helping her replace the brake pads on a 2019 Silverado that had been sitting in the bay since Wednesday. He was good with his hands. She told him so. He went red. The woman on the red touring bike, whose name was Agnes and who was 67 and had been riding for 30 years, sat in the office on her father's couch and drank coffee and looked at the framed photo on the wall. A younger version of Lena's father, standing in this same bay, arm around a 7-year-old Lena, both of them grinning, and said, "He taught you well." "He tried," Lena said. "No," Agnes said. She looked at the photo a moment longer. "He taught you well." They left the way they'd arrived in ones and twos, the bikes filing out onto the highway and heading north and south, and east toward Kelowna and west toward Hope. The lot emptied slowly, the way crowds empty when nobody really wants to be the first one gone. Hatchet left last again. He put on his helmet. He looked at the sign above the bay door. Kowalski and Sons paint peeling at the corners. "You should repaint that," he said. "I know," Lena said. "Keep the name, though." She looked at him. "It's a good name," he said simply. "People remember it." He rode out onto the highway and turned north. Lena stood in the bay door and watched him go, and then watched the last 2 bikes, Viper and Finn, follow him out and shrink down to 2 points of light in the distance, and then nothing. The lot was quiet. The highway was quiet. The morning sun was coming in at the angle it came in at this time of year, low and long, hitting the west wall of the shop and the old pegboard, and her father's tools hung in their places. She went inside. She put the canvas envelope in the safe. She took the eviction notice out of her jacket pocket, folded it once, and put it in the recycling bin by the door. Then she picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and she stood in the bay and looked at the sign from the inside, the back of the letters, where the paint was thicker and hadn't started to peel yet. Kowalski and Sons. She'd never changed it after her father got sick. She'd thought about crossing out in Sons, about putting her own name up there, about what it meant to keep a name that didn't quite fit anymore. She'd never decided. She thought maybe she had now. She drank the cold coffee. She picked up a wrench. Outside on the highway somewhere north, she could still just barely hear the last of the bikes, that low rolling sound fading into the distance like a storm that had already passed. She got back to work.